Welcome back. So it's an important day when the interim budget was presented. Time to take stock of the report card of how the government has done in the last 10 years and also set the agenda a little bit going forward. It's not a day when you really expect to see too many major announcements on taxation, which is why we got none. But to try and understand where the economy is, where is it poised, and what are the next steps ahead for it, we're being joined by Suman Berry, Vice Chairperson of Niti Aayog. Shri Berry, thank you so much for joining us. This is Vikram Chandra here. I began by saying it's a good time to take stock of all the very, very remarkable achievements and developments that we have seen, specifically when it comes to growth, the growth numbers, the continued buoyancy we are seeing in taxation. What would be some of the key highlights that you think you would like to draw attention to?
Vikram, a pleasure to be on screen with you again. Look, I now have the privilege of being at Niti Aayog, for us, really, this estimate that something like 25 crore Indians escaped from multi-dimensional poverty over the 10 years of the Modi government. I mean, that's where I think it starts, because this is an important indicator, and we follow methodology and work in cooperation with the UN, with the UNDP, that this entire set of policies, welfare policies, macro policies, capital expenditure policies, is actually delivering to people on the ground, and indeed particularly to the states of UP, Bihar, where there has been an incidence of multidimensional poverty, but where the progress has been particularly marked. So I think then the question becomes, how did we get here? And do we need to keep doing the same for the future? Or in a fast-moving world and in a growing India, how do we need to fine-tune what has already delivered? And that's where I think the budget speech and the budget, the interim budget, but in due course the post-election budget will provide important guidelines and guardrails. Okay? So I really want to say that the vindication of what has happened till now is in the multidimensional poverty numbers.
Mr. Berry, I think you're absolutely right. Getting 25 crore Indians out of multidimensional poverty is a very, very important achievement that has been done. There are two aspects to it. It was often thought that welfare schemes are the only way to do it, and that those welfare schemes are being rolled out right now and are being done very successfully. But at the same time, there also seems to be a lot of focus on growth. If the economy grows fast enough, as is happening with infrastructure spending, improving logistics, improving the entire environment for growth, that also seems to be having a benefit. Would you say that there are twin engines working to get people out of poverty?
Lots of reactions to that very thoughtful question, Vikram. Let me first say that I've been in this role just under 2 years now, and I would point out to you and to the audience here that it was not always the case that a focus on growth was seen to be politically palatable. Indeed, one could argue that where Europe is today, essentially thinking about degrowth, that a lot of the preoccupations of governments since independence have really been on equity and equality. And so I do think that, as you say, that that there can be such a thing as inclusive growth is something that the record of the last 10 years does substantiate. But I think the more important point is that the Prime Minister has now, in this Amrit Kal, made it a national objective not to make a dash for growth, but to aim for rising living standards while achieving inclusion and respecting the planet. And I'm happy to go into the various elements of that model. How it has worked up till now, yes, but of course it's been impacted by war, it's been impacted by COVID, but also how those of us who try and support him in realizing this vision look to the future. And I think the budget today gives a lot of insights into what that future trajectory might be.
When you look at all of this happening, the spending that is happening, not just on welfare programs, massive spending on infrastructure, 11.11 lakh crore, there has to be spending on defense, all that expenditure is there and it presumably has to be there. No fresh taxes right now, and it's not that taxes have been buoyant because compliance has gone up and because of other factors and the economy is growing. It's not because tax rates have been higher. And yet the fiscal deficit is appearing in some sort of control, 5.8 going down to 5.1, maybe 4.5 later. How is this happening? How is there money to spend on the things that need to be spent on, yet taxes aren't going up and yet the fiscal deficit is in control? Is it because all of those policies are now leading to a particular point of a virtuous cycle where you keep on growing, more and more buoyancy and tax comes in and that pays for those expenditures? Is that what's happening?
Well, I do have to say that the details of this are in the budget documents, and so a more, if you like, micro answer would really come from the Finance Ministry, whose document this is. I can talk more in levels, in terms of strategy and also in terms of directions. So let me, as it were, frame my response by distinguishing between the way in which Niti Aayog thinks about the medium and long-term future and the sorts of considerations that the Chief Economic Advisor and the Finance Ministry must have in mind when they shape a budget. So as far as we are concerned, what is necessary for us to become Viksit Bharat is rising productivity, particularly rising labor productivity, and that depends on investment, yes. It depends a lot on technology, and it depends on human capital. Okay, so looking medium term, those are the things that matter. It is also the case that the long term is going to be fundamentally affected by various aspects of the climate challenge, which both in terms of what is called mitigation, but also the impact of climate change, adaptation, all of this is actually going to require a rise in the overall investment ratio, including government investment. So that is looking out to, say, 2030 and beyond to 2047. Now, your question is really about how you have money for all the sensible things and stick to a fiscal deficit, and why that is important. And I would say, Vikram, that is important for at least two reasons. First, economists tend to talk in terms of crowding in private investment and crowding out private investment. I think the government made a judicious decision in the depths of COVID that it was unlikely that private investment would rebound quickly. There was too much uncertainty. And so government ought to pick up the slack. And they did that, as many other governments, while letting the fiscal deficit rise. Okay? That was appropriate. But what we have seen sustained after that, even as the recovery got going, was a continued focus on capital expenditure. Now, what has this been at the quote-unquote expense of? I mean, you will see that there are various constituencies and constituents who would like more money for their pet projects. I've seen in the banners below that actually there's been a fairly sharp cutback in subsidies, and I think some of this should be subsidies on fossil fuels as well. So there is certainly a profound restructuring of expenditure taking place, but there's also the important point that I think you were making, which is that a whole series of reforms, particularly GST, but let's also admit the reduction in corporate tax rates, the rationalization of personal income taxes, the government is now reaping tax buoyancy as well. But I think if you look under the bonnet, you will find that that resources have been reallocated, even in an interim budget, as they should be. But the broad, as it were, directions and strategy, I think, is clear, and I'm happy to articulate that if you want me to.
Right. So just taking forward from what you said about enhancing productivity and also enhancing human capital, one of the aspects of enhancing human capital is obviously to invest in that human capital, not just in terms of education and skilling, but also health. And perhaps we're increasingly seeing some of that, including in budget speeches, talking about the investment in Indians and in Indian human capital. And at a broader level in enhancing productivity, would you say more work will perhaps have to be done in making the factors of production even more effective, even more efficient, whether especially when it comes to land, for example, or labor, and enhancing productivity in all those areas?
Yes, but I think what is quite important in the budget speech is, as it were, the new frontier for reform. There are references which are not terribly conspicuous, but which go back to the government's focus on ease of business. For example, I recall that in the discussion on MSMEs, there is a recognition of the fact that the regulatory framework for MSMEs may be one of the impediments to, as it were, their thriving. Of course, we have achieved a lot in protecting the MSMEs through various financial schemes through COVID, but now they have to participate in, as it were, the next phase of growth. Vikram, I would also point out the importance of what economists would call formalization in the labor market, because the fact of the matter is that it's much easier to and more likely that you would invest in the training of employees if they are likely to remain on your rolls, and that's more likely in established enterprises than in mom and pop operations. Now, I think what is noteworthy, and these are political judgments, which clearly the Honourable Prime Minister, must have been involved in, although as Finance Minister's budget. So look, how important is it for India's youth to create a pot of money to support them in their R&D, in their risk-taking, in their innovation, rather than providing that same 1 lakh crore for, as it were, expanding the scope of Ayushman Bharat more broadly. Those are imponderable questions, but they are, in a sense, judgments that have been made in the framing of the budget. Education, I think the government has a very striking track record in the at various levels, but I'll talk about higher education because it was explicitly mentioned in the speech, which is the number of IITs, universities, all of this. I think, as the Prime Minister has said in my presence at meetings of the Governing Council, he is always looking ahead, and yes, there is still catch up to be done on health. I'm thinking of nutrition. I'm also thinking of stunting and wasting. But let me also indicate that one of the first initiatives of the Prime Minister at the beginning of his term was to focus on sanitation. And, people were surprised. Let me tell you, he was well ahead of the curve, because there was fairly, as it were, recent research which indicated that it wasn't only a question of nutrition that was responsible for stunting and wasting. It was much more diarrhea and airborne diarrhea. So if you would give me a minute longer, the whole focus on women and women-led development is actually very contemporary, because it's even in the rich countries, the data to indicate that the impact of empowering women on outcomes of various kinds, that research is really only dates to the 90s. And yet, the Prime Minister is now talking about women-led development, has put that into our G20 communique. So there is a lot of coherence, which ultimately, of course, has to find its expression in the budget, between the various initiatives. I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
Right. Well, one last question before I allow you to go. I mean, as I began by saying that there's a very strong bet on growth that India is making. And if India continues to be one of the bright spots in the global economy, continues to grow 6-7% till 2030 and beyond, not only will India change and transform itself in unimaginable manners, but so perhaps will the world. India will certainly be the third largest economy in the world, and powering a lot of global growth. To your mind, how likely, how probable is it that we will continue to grow at 6% or 7% for the next 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, if we do the right things?
Vikram, I had a brief, as you know, I used to head a think tank here, but for a brief while I was the chief economist of Royal Dutch Shell, located in The Hague. And oil companies have to make long-term bets. And in the 1970s, Shell decided that the best way to fool yourself was to make long-term projections. None of us today, none of us in 99, before Y2K, could have imagined the world of 2024. So, and somebody, when I worked on Latin America, said to me, the art of policy is to have a strong sense of direction, but then to be opportunistic as circumstances change. I think the real lesson of India, and certainly under this government, is that it has decision-making structures that are nimble and lead to resilience. And I think the underlying philosophy of the budget and the Prime Minister is essentially to have that resilience at the household level through a combination of a social safety net and empowering people through finance, through skills, through opportunities. And so I would say, thinking about our journey to Viksit Bharat in terms of, running a marathon, it's not what it's about. It's much more, as it were, going on a hike or maybe mountain climbing, something like that. Obstacles present themselves, and then you have to be equipped for that. And that is not primarily even a national or union government task. That's as much a state government task, and that's why it is such a privilege to be in the job that I have, because it's my duty to work with all members of my governing council who are the chief ministers of states and the LGs of the union territories.
So Suman Berry, Vice Chairperson of Niti Aayog, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective.
A pleasure, Vikram. Thank you.
And we're going to take a quick break right now, but I'll be back with a lot more, including secretaries of the Government of India, the Chief Economic Advisor. Many people are going to be joining us to shed light on the interim budget and on the roadmap ahead for continued growth right here in India.